I'd like to introduce you all to Kevin Shakespeare, who will be leading on today's webinar or closed meeting. But before I hand over, if we could just go through a couple of the housekeeping rules. Because we've done this one as a closed meeting rather than a webinar, you're not automatically muted. So if you wouldn't mind muting yourself while Kevin is speaking, but then do feel free to unmute yourself if you want to ask a question. What he's going to do is do a section and then stop, go through questions, and then carry on. So you can either answer the question, you can either write the questions on the chat at the bottom. So anybody who's not totally familiar with these things now, if you hover down at the bottom, you'll see the chat function. Click on there and you can type in your question. Or when we get to the question sections, if you want to, just unmute yourself and then you can ask the question yourself. So that's it. That's all really in terms of the housekeeping. If you do accidentally leave the meeting, then you can just rejoin using the same link. So that's fantastic. I'm going to now hand over to Kevin. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. So good afternoon, everybody. So I've called my presentation up on screen. So it's a pleasure to meet you, and if you've heard me speak before, hopefully I'm not going to repeat some of the things that I've said previously. But so let's call up the full screen. So what we're going to do is very much focus on the import side and trading in 2021 post-transition period. First of all, just a quick note about the Institute of Export and International Trade. Established since 1935, the Institute's involved in all elements around importing, exporting and international trade, supply chain logistics, and is really the only organisation that has a full suite of professional qualifications regulated by regulators and universities as well. Now, in terms of what we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about tariffs, the trade journey, the requirement for customs declaration, the role of Inco Terms, VAT, a little bit about Northern Ireland, and then further considerations. And as I said, raise as many questions as you feel are appropriate, and I'll do my best to sort of answer them in that regard. There's obviously some areas in terms of policy and regulation, I'll certainly do my best in answering them, aware obviously the likes of APFA will also be involved in certain areas as well, the Animal, Plant and Health Authority. So if we look at tariffs first of all, so again, I may be telling you things you already know, or hopefully not, or as the case may be. So as we know at the moment, the focus is on an EU-UK trade deal. And that's all we hear about. But we mustn't forget the fact that it's not just the tariffs that need to be negotiated, this concept of a free trade agreement. It's also lots of other elements around regulatory compliance, and how the EU and UK trade and work together from the 1st of January next year. Excuse me. Now, if there is no EU-UK trade deal, we revert to what's always termed as WTO, World Trade Organization terms. And we're going to look at what we mean by that term. So in other words, tariffs may apply on goods imported from the European Union to Great Britain. And you'll see my focus here in some aspects when I refer to GB, I'm referring to Great Britain, which is Wales, Scotland and England. And in other terms, when I'm referring to the wider requirement, it's the UK. But in this case, tariff may apply to goods imported into GB from the European Union. And those tariffs that would apply would be the same tariffs as importing from all WTO members, so all 164 members of WTO, be that China, the United States, for example, unless there is a trade deal between the UK and the third country. So in the same way as the UK can negotiate a free trade agreement with the European Union, it can agree it with third countries. And we're going to look at what other countries later the UK has negotiated trade deals with, and those that it's trying to negotiate. And in the context of import, so we're saying tariffs may apply to goods. Well, what are those tariffs? We're going to look in a minute, but those tariffs effectively are being announced under what's called a UK global import tariff, which was announced some months ago. And we'll look at examples of that for your sector shortly. But those tariffs could be subject to change. The UK has announced, if there is no trade deal with the EU, that it does reserve the right to change that global import tariff. So that's something to consider. Not saying it will be changed from the levels quoted so far, but it could be. So let's look at example tariffs. So what we can see on the screen here is we can see example tariffs that could apply. And those tariffs effectively, you have what's called commodity code. Commodity code is essential, and it is the link to tariffs and licenses and everything that derives when goods move through customs. And you have the commodity code, the EU tariff currently. So if you were bringing in these products from outside the European Union and there was no trade agreement with the EU, these would be the tariffs that apply. And then you have the new UK tariff, which is the current UK tariff applying from the 1st of January. And if we look at some of these tariffs, we can see a number of what's referred to as liberalizations. So the tariff has been reduced or eliminated to zero from a current 8.3, 6.5% EU tariff. And it's important to mention that tariff applies to imports, excuse me, from all countries in the world, not just the European Union. And we can see in some cases that EU tariffs have changed. So the EU has a habit of having different tariffs depending on the season. So we can see 8.5% in one season and 12% in another season. The UK has simplified those tariffs to one tariff all year round, in this case 8%. So we can see some changes there to the actual tariff that applies. And there's just some examples. These slides will be available to you, but it's critical you get the correct tariff to make sure, sorry, the correct commodity code to make sure you get you pay the correct tariff. Further examples we can see here, some changes to tariffs. We can see at the bottom some changes, and we can see again the simplification towards the top 5 tariffs there. So some changes currently, but clearly if you're importing from the European Union, even if it's been reduced to 8%, that 8% is still a very big impact on your business in terms of tariffs. And I will talk about something called warehousing later. And then we have not so much horticulture and plants. We have probably elements that may be applicable to your business in terms of other products used in your business itself. And we can see these are lower tariffs, but in a number of cases, yes, liberalised to zero, but in other cases, they've been reduced. So those are the tariffs applicable currently under the UK global import tariff. But are there any questions that anyone has on anything on tariffs so far?
Oh, hello, Kevin. It's Hazel Swain. I've just wondered, the tariff, I noticed that there's a tariff for indoor plants,
Yeah.
young plants, like cuttings. What about outdoor cuttings? Because I can't seem to find the tariff that's for young cuttings.
Okay. Do you know the commodity code for that product?
No, I don't. No, that sorry, I needed to know the commodity code, not the tariff. The commodity code.
Yeah.
Because it shows you the for indoor young cuttings, but it doesn't seem to show you outdoor young cuttings.
Okay, and that's you looked on the gov.uk commodity code checker site?
Yes, I did, and it's either because if it makes a huge difference. Well, it's 2%. So I just wondered, yeah, I think you can actually go on HMRC and ask for your commodity code to be verified, I think.
You can, yeah. What you would do there in that instance, and if it is an issue, you can ask for what's called a binding tariff decision.
Yeah.
So if you go on gov.uk and binding tariff, ask for request binding tariff information, you'll see a sort of big green button that you press on, which you can then provide information to enable you to hopefully get the commodity code.
Okay, I'll do that.
Yeah, so if you can't find that, then that's important.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question. Great. Any other questions at all? Okay, so we'll continue now on that point on tariffs. And sorry, I'll just raise one more thing on tariffs and I know it was a very good question raised around duty deferment. So in theory, if you pay tariffs, and we'll talk about the UK border operating model shortly, normally import tariffs are what they say, and who pays that import tariff depends on the Inco terms, which we'll look at, but let's just say it's the Welsh business that is responsible for those tariffs. Those tariffs are normally payable upon importation. And the only way you would be able to defer them would be through either some government action on deferring, or through establishing a duty deferment account with HM Revenue and Customs. Now, normally that HM deferment account requires a bank guarantee to support it, a financial guarantee. HMRC have announced, and it's going through Parliament at the moment, a procedure where you will only require a duty deferment account for high-risk traders. So those businesses with a history of non-compliance, penalties, or poor record keeping, or possibly for financial solvency issues. So outside of that, a duty deferment account, you will be able to get one outside of a high-risk trader for most businesses. So again, that should help the situation in terms of paying tariffs, or it's obviously not eliminating the tariff, it's deferring the tariff. If you do, however, have a situation that you're bringing goods in and onward selling them to the Republic of Ireland, for example, there may be another process we're going to look at called customs warehousing, which could eliminate the tariff. But I'll talk about that later. So that's the point on duty deferment accounts. You would apply to HMRC for a duty deferment account, but from the 1st of January next year, you do not require a financial guarantee, which you do today, unless you are classified as a high-risk trader. So the trade and customs journey. So irrespective of the trade deal or the free trade agreement, if there is a free trade agreement, from January 21, goods moving between the UK and EU and UK will be between different customs territories. So at the moment, it's one customs territory. During the transition period, from the 1st of January, it becomes two. The European Union customs territory, which includes Southern Ireland, we'll talk about Northern Ireland separately, and the UK customs territory. So effectively, there's two customs territories. And because they are separate customs territory, that means that there's a requirement for export customs declarations. So they're required to be an outbound declaration. So for example, from the European Union to Great Britain, and there will need to be an inbound import declaration for goods entering Great Britain from the European Union. Who is responsible for those declarations depends on the Inco terms, and we go through the Inco terms later. But irrespective of who makes that declaration, even if a freight forwarder or an agent broker makes them on your behalf, you are liable for that declaration. So you need to check the declaration and the output, because upon customs audit, they will ask you about the declaration and they will check that it's all being completed correctly. So liability is with you if you are responsible for that declaration. So we're going to go through what responsibility for declaration means. We have a specific slide shortly. So suddenly this is no longer around tariffs we talked about, no longer around paperwork and declarations. It's what sits behind the declarations. because goods are moving from one customs territory to another customs territory. So in many respects, the way the GB trades with the European Union and EU with GB is the same as the EU trading with Canada with the United States, for example. So let's look about exports to GB. So these are exports from the European Union, from your supplier in the European Union to Great Britain. And again, very happy to take questions if you're moving goods through Rotterdam and they're coming from outside the EU. So very happy to take questions on that if that is your situation. So we have this situation where the goods are at the exporter's premises. And the reason I'm showing this journey, because this is the Inco Terms journey later, and this is the freight journey as well. Goods available at the exporter's premises loaded onto the lorry. The lorry then moves, and it could be by rail freight in Europe, for example, from the exporter's premises to the port of dispatch. So whether that's Rotterdam, whether that's Antwerp, whether that's Calais, and then the goods required to clear customs at port of dispatch. So what does the person, the organization making this export declaration have to do? And this is no longer just about the export declaration. The exporter, or what's called the declarant of record, the exporter record, has a number of things to do. Now that could be you if you use one of the 11 Inco terms. It's unlikely to be you, but as we're going to look at, it could be you doing this. If your overseas supplier insists that you pick up the goods at their premises, it could be you that are responsible for all this. And we're going to look at the Inco terms that could apply in those circumstances. So if currently you are arranging for the freight to be collected from the buyer's premises, there's a possibility that you will be responsible for all the following. There's two Inco terms. Under the other Inco term, it would be your buyer that would be responsible for it. Sorry, your supplier. So the export customs declaration. A customs declaration is required to be issued to the customs authority. So for example, in the Netherlands, in Belgium, and in France. That declaration is required. Yes, again, the freight forwarder could make it on your behalf. You may require a phytosanitary certificate, and we'll talk about that later. There may be requirements on labelling and goods placed on the market. In this case, it's the labelling applicable for the European Union supplier to place goods on the GB market. If there is a trade deal between the UK and the EU, well, that's good news. Then there wouldn't be tariffs if it's a free trade agreement, but there could be a requirement to meet origin of the goods. So when we look at origin later, think about flowers, for example, possibly coming into Rotterdam and onward. They may not be of EU origin, and we'll look at that example if it's applicable. If you have temporary exports, they could be subject to carnets. So, for example, goods taken over for an exhibition would be required to the EU. There is also a requirement for another declaration, which is a safety and security exit declaration. Yes, the good news is that's not you making it or not your supplier. It's a haulier invariably that makes that, but they may charge for having to make that declaration because the goods are leaving one customs territory and moving to another. It's not just about customs, it's safety and security of the goods as well. And the packaging must be ISPM 15 compliant, so especially heat treated. And in this instance, it would be the responsibility of your European supplier, but you would want to make sure that the packaging, if it's wooden packaging, is compliant. So suddenly we can see here there's a lot more to think about just in this paperwork and the customs declaration. There's a lot more that needs to be required to keep goods flowing and moving. Now let's look at imports. So you might say, oh, this is more me now. So in 10 of the 11 Inco terms, it would be you responsible for the import. But there is one, 11th Inco term, which is delivered duty paid as the importer, where you would not be responsible for this. And again, we're going to look at this. So if, for example, the lorry turns up at your premises and your products are unloaded from the lorry, it could be one of two Inco terms. It could be DDP, and as we're going to look at very, very shortly, DAP, delivered at place. I'm going to look at both of those because this is critical to who is responsible for certain activity. So possible import tariffs if there's no UK-EU trade deal. We've talked about that. import customs declaration required. Goods subject to SPS checks, and we'll talk about border control posts and border operating models shortly. Compliance on labelling, packaging, and origin of goods. Import VAT becomes payable upon importation. However, the good news is in the UK has announced postponed import VAT accounting, and I'll talk about that in a specific slide. And we also have an entry safety and security declaration, which is provided invariably by the haulier. And again, the packaging must be ISPM 15 compliant. So suddenly we're seeing here more requirements for both the EU supplier and yourself, the buyer. And if you're moving these goods on, and I know we have export next week, then in theory you have the same processes if you're moving the goods to the Republic of Ireland, for example. So a lot more processes here needed. So I'm going to talk in a minute about the UK border operating model, which has been introduced, and the phasing of it and how that affects you. But are there any immediate questions anyone's got on this? Bearing in mind I've obviously got extra slides.
You talk about border posts at the moment. I'm obviously in England rather than Wales, I'm afraid. Sorry, it's Bernard's Nurseries, John here. We are operating under a place of destination system for the first 6 months, the same. Is that taking that into account, or is this after July 2021 you're talking about here?
Yeah, absolutely, John. I was going to come on to that in the next slide. So that is after, no, it's a really good question, John. Thanks for pointing it out. So the UK has introduced a border operating model, which is after July 2021. So before July 2021, there can be inspections at the place of destination. But no, so it's a really good question. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Great. Any other questions from anyone? Okay. So if we now look at the border operating model. Now the UK has announced a three-phase border operating model. And it's trying to define it in terms of what are standard goods and controlled goods. And there are different processes. So if it's standard goods, that means, we'll come on to the inspection side of it in a minute, that means that for customs declarations, they can be deferred for up to 6 months from the date of import, up to the 30th of June. So if you were to import goods on, say, the 1st of April, you can defer that declaration until the 1st of October for customs purposes. And if you use that deferral of the declaration, that means you don't pay import duties for 6 months. That does raise a few questions, though, because there is a process there that you have to go through. It's not just that your goods are going to enter without any customs checks at all, or any customs audits. You have to undertake a process, or your agent or your forwarder can do it for you at a cost, called entry into declarants records. So you are keeping the records and the information related to the importation, which is available, which could be available for audit purposes as well. So it's not just a case of you sitting back and thinking, right, let's get the goods in the country, not going to worry about any documentation. You have to keep that documentation. So if you were to defer for 6 months, you would have to make a declaration from 6 months from date of import, or if it's the 1st of July you imported, on the 1st of July. So all the documentation, which we'll look at shortly, like commercial invoices, transport documents, need to be maintained and put into your own record keeping, or your freight forwarder or agent can do it on your behalf. And then when you make the full declaration, if you defer, you have to have approval for a customs procedure. So you have to be approved by customs. And that customs procedure is referred to as CFSP, Customs Freight Simplified Procedures. Now, and the idea of that is that it expedites customs clearance. But if you were to apply for that, you have to have approval from customs. So before the 1st of October, using an example, you would have to be approved by customs. Now, customs at the moment is looking at, sorry to excuse the pun, simplifying the CFSP process, because currently the application process is 18 pages. and a lot of businesses are not using it because it's technical and there's a lot of paperwork. Customs are looking at simplifying that process, and that's work in progress. Normally, to approve for CFSP, you would also require a financial guarantee again. HMRC have said that financial guarantees will only be required from 1st of January for high-risk traders. So back to high-risk traders again. If you're not a high-risk trader, you will not require a financial guarantee. So that is the staging process for standard goods. Clearly, products of animal origin and some plants, however, are not standard goods, and we're going to look at that shortly. And inspection, as has been indicated, will be at point of destination. So for high-risk plants or for less non-high-risk plants, point of destination until the 1st of July, where it's full customs declarations, relevant tariffs must be paid, full safety and security declarations, increase in physical checks at the border and samples taken, and then if you want to defer, you use the CFSP process on an ongoing basis. Now, if you are bringing in lots and lots of goods, and don't ask me what definition of lots and lots of goods are, but maybe more than 5 to 10 a week, you may want to consider CFSP as part of a wider process, because CFSP allows you to defer. You bring the goods in, this is after 1st of July, you bring the goods in on a simplified basis. So, for example, you're completing 8 to 12 fields on the customs declaration as opposed to 60, and you make a full supplementary declaration by the 4th working day of the following month. It also allows you, if it is the same product, to bulk the declaration and save on declaration costs. That might not be applicable for many of you, but if it is, you could consider CFSP, and happy to take questions there. Now, so let's move outside customs and let's move to the regulatory requirements from the 1st of January.
Can I interrupt? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, John, yeah.
Just before we move on too quickly past CFSP, I'm assuming a customs agent can do that on your behalf still if you're appointing them.
Absolutely correct, yeah.
Yeah, okay. No, so something to talk about. Thank you very much. That was it.
Oh, thanks, John. So from the 1st of January, sanitary and phytosanitary controls will be implemented from the 1st of January for live animals, animal products, fish, shellfish, and plants, and high-risk plants and products. And that detail is available from the border operating model. But what I'm going to look through more specifically in a minute, slides of examples of what we mean by plants. So clearly there will be identity and physical checks at the point of destination. All imports of live animals and high-risk plants will require pre-notification and health documentation. So we're now talking about the 1st of January. And what do we mean by pre-notification? So the importer must provide advance notice of consignment on arrival into GB. An import notification is for a new system called IPAFS, Imports of Products, Animals, Food and Feed System. So advance notification is required, and we'll talk about sanitary certificates as opposed to health certificates in this regard. But I'm going to look through specifically what this means shortly for plants. So here we are, and sorry, this is quite a detailed slide from gov.uk. You may have seen this. I don't always like using gov.uk because there's a lot of information, but I thought in this instance it's best to use. So this is from the 1st of January. High-risk plants and plant products from the EU must have a phytosanitary health certificate. And there is a P-notification submitted by the importer in England, Scotland and Wales. And it must, and they are subject to documentary and identity checks and the physical checks. You don't have to pay for those services. Inspection fees for EU imports will apply in England and Wales from the 1st of April. The plant types on this list include all plants for planting, ware potatoes, some seed and timber, and used for agricultural forestry machinery. And then you've got a link with further details. Now, APFA will be closer to this than myself, and some of you may be already in contact with the Animal Plant and Health Authority. And I believe a list of plants is now available or is still to be produced. So that is the process there. And then we also have, if you want a physical plant inspection for EU regulated high priority plants, you can become a place of destination from the 1st of January until the 30th of June, but you need to register. And that replaces, as we've discussed, the first point of arrival, which would be, for example, Dover from January 2020. If you plan to move your goods onward from your first place of destination after their import checks, you may require a plant passport. Now, as I said, I am reading here, obviously, from the gov.uk notice, and it could be that you've already been in contact with ATFA or through your trade association, or as appropriate here in that regard.
I think. So we've got that already. That's the plant passport number.
So what about the 1st of April? So from the 1st of April, you must use the relevant IT system to notify ATFA that you're importing regulated plants and plant products. So we're suddenly now regulated. And the guide will publish details of the IT systems before the 1st of January. All regulated plants and plant products imported into England, Scotland or Wales from the EU must have phytosanitary certificates, which can take up to 7 days to get. ATFA will inspect the phytosanitary certificates in England, Wales, Scottish Government in Scotland. So regulated plants and plant products include all plants for planting, root vegetables, common fruits, cut flowers, seeds and grains, and potatoes from some countries. So again, read in there, but clearly it's about knowing your product. But how will the authorities know what the product is? Generally, they'll know from the commodity code upon declaration. And then plants that will not require certification. You will not need a phytosanitary certificate for these plants from the 1st of April. So fruit and vegetables have been processed and packaged, salads, sandwiches, composite products, and you've got a list there of the products concerned. So that is, and I'm so appreciate I'm reading before I go back to customs and Inco terms shortly, but any questions on the border operating model or on requirements there?
As I was mentioned about place of destination, it's my understanding that you need to have that in place the 1st of January.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
It's not going to be done at the port, certainly with the amount of traffic that's going to be going through in January and February. So I don't want to give anybody I
think it's an interesting point, and I would also ask everyone to look at their, obviously work with your freight forwarder, is to look at the ports there. Now, there's a lot of talk obviously around COVID, Dover, Calais, Dover, and Eurotunnel, to actually look at the ports for arrivals and ports of dispatch. And also Felixstowe clearly has had a bit of difficulty lately in terms of its IT systems as well. So the point there is to work with your freight forwarder to actually look at the ports. But you're right, the emphasis will be on the place of destination. Okay, so let's excuse me, let's move on now to Inco terms, because this becomes crucial from what we've discussed earlier and what we're going to discuss now. So again, this slide's available to you, but Inco terms dictate and determine so much of the trade journey. It's not just who pays for the transport, it's not just who arranges the transport. Suddenly we now have extra elements such as import tariffs, duties, VAT, customs declarations, importer and exporter of record. Things that we've never had to worry about before for EU-UK trade. We only worry about it more if it's rest of world trade. Suddenly this becomes more important. And in every case you should have negotiated, you will need, or you may well have done so, but you will need to agree the Inco terms that apply for your movements, in this instance from the EU supplier to the GB importer. So these are the Inco terms applicable. There are 11 Inco terms, and there's a new set of Inco terms that we announced in 2020. Now, with a lot of EU trade, and it tends to be the top two and the bottom, the top two, DAP, delivered at place, and DDP, delivered duty paid, that tend to be used. You can use any Inco term, but it tends to be more that lorry proverbially turns up at your premises with the goods, or you're responsible for arranging the freight. You can arrange to share the freight. So, for example, the goods are delivered to Dover and then you take responsibility at that stage. The reality of Europe is more the four I've said. It doesn't mean it's the only four, whereas with the rest of the world, it tends to be the other Inco terms come into play more. So these are the Inco terms, but let's spend some time on this slide because this slide is really important. So it might not be these four, but let's say it is. If you agree X works, so effectively you are responsible for collecting those goods from the premises of the EU supplier. You have to arrange the freight. You will pay for the freight. Obviously, you'll probably use the services of a freight forwarder, but you will pay for it. But in addition, you are responsible for both declarations, the export declaration in the EU and the import declaration into Great Britain. So you have maximum responsibility. Now, if you were to do that, you would have to obtain what's called an EU EORI number and an EU VAT number. So I'll stop at that stage. I'm trying to think of circumstances when this would apply. You might want to take control of the transport. You might want to do it. Your supplier, in theory, could say, well, if I'm going to continue supplying you, you've got to use X works. Do any of you, and I'm not sure if you're happy to say, have any questions on X works and what it means for you? Or presumably, will none of you be using X works?
I was going to ask you about that. We basically, for example, may have up to 5 suppliers in a week, and we have a transport company where we will nominate which suppliers to collect from during the week. We consolidate, say, the 5 suppliers' loads together and bring them in as one consignment, which is then dropped off at a nearby carrier because we can't get a Dutch lorry to our nursery because of the location. We then collect it via a 3.5 ton van backwards and forwards, shuttle the stuff back. So from talking to our transport company, they seem happy to do the paperwork on our behalf and to get it to the carrier our end. I guess that comes down to the customs side, whether it's deemed as being delivered when it's unloaded at that point or whether it's back at the nursery. I'd like to think it would be considered delivered once it's back at the nursery. And I presume from our carrier and the paperwork I've gone backwards and forwards with them that they're happy to do it under the DDP, I think. Does that sound like what would...
Yeah, it sounds interesting there, yeah. So thank you very much for that. I guess in terms of declarations, we'll look at DDP in a minute, but let's say it's DAP, delivered at place, and in many respects they're very, very similar. The difference is with DAP is that you can have delivered at place. That place could be your nursery, it could be a consolidation or deconsolidation centre in, I don't know, Maidstone, Ashford, wherever. So, I guess if we're looking at the Netherlands, it could be in Felixstowe or Ipswich, for example. So it could be DAP or nursery, it could be DAP, Ipswich or Felixstowe. In both instances, if it's DAP, you have responsibility for that import declaration. The only one where the supplier or suppliers, I must stress, have responsibility for the declaration is DDP. And then it would be DDP your nursery. It wouldn't be DDP Ipswich, for example. So if that's the case, your suppliers would have to effectively, they would have responsibility for UK VAT, any import duties, and the declaration itself. Yes, it could be that their forwarder is going to provide that service on their behalf, but it's ultimately their responsibility. And they would need a GB EORI number and a GB VAT number. So they would have to make that application. So there's a lot more work for them. Doesn't mean they don't do that, but there's a lot more work for them, even if the freight forwarder is responsible. And they're taking on a lot of responsibility also as the as the declarant there. So I guess it could depend there whether it's DAP or DDP. But if it's dropped off at the, if you like, the deconsolidation centre, then it's highly likely to be DAP.
Right, thank you.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Sorry to keep butting in. It's just important points. I've got a supplier that's based in Holland, wants to deliver directly to us, so DDP. Well, they're saying they can do all the paperwork for us, but my understanding is they need to be a UK-based company or have somebody based in the UK that's doing that for them, so they can have a GB IORI number. But I'm getting lots of positive emails, but I don't think it's actually correct what they're sending me, and I wanted to just get clarification on that.
Yeah, it's a really good question, John, and we could turn this around for Europe as well. It is that technically, to obtain an IORI number and a VAT number, let's look at the UK first of all, you don't have to be a legal entity.
Right.
You can get one. There is a risk, obviously, that if there is unpaid VAT and unpaid duty, that the UK authorities reserve the right to insist upon legal entity status or refuse companies that do not pay their duties and VAT. But the theory is you do not currently have to have legal entity status.
Because, I mean, in theory, it's quite straightforward in the fact that if we get a deal, everything I move will be zero rated on the commodity codes. So there'll be no import duty. And the VAT will just be a deferred tick box arrangement. So effectively, at point of you doing your normal VAT return, you don't pay it out because you claim it back. So that's zero as well. So in theory, it's all straightforward. It's just whether they can do it or not is my worry. And I just, you obviously can't help me on that, but it seems,
yeah, I mean, if they're supplying you on DDP terms, what you've got to make sure is that they're doing what they say they're doing. So they've got their UK VAT and UK IORI, and you can ask for the numbers.
Yeah, no, that's
I guess there, but there is obviously a slight risk. They say they're going to do it, and they're not going to do it.
Yeah. All right. Sorry, I just keep interrupting, but they're just very important points that I just wanted to clarify.
No, you're absolutely correct.
There are quite a lot of Italians, a lot of people saying they can do it for us, and at the minute I'm not convinced because they're saying to me that they can do the freight handling part of it, so I don't need to have a customs agent. But I feel I do. So
yeah, it could be, and I'm not saying it is, that your suppliers are thinking, oh, my freight forwarder is going to do everything for me. Now they're still liable, but it could be that they're not appreciating they need that UK IORI and UK VAT number.
Yeah, so that's what I thought as well.
Okay. Yeah. Can I just add, our carrier seems to has given us numerous forms to fill out. Channel ports is one of the contacts forms that we've had to fill out, and they've got the IORI number and everything else to come in, and they've also got a clearance company. I think probably the biggest risk is you can be incredibly well organised, but if there's one load on that lorry that is the wrong way, it doesn't matter how good your paperwork is because you're relying on the guy next to you, the pallet next to you to have been done properly.
Yeah, but that comes down to the consignments, doesn't it? Effectively, that consignment can be quarantined or wherever if it's a border point, or but on a lorry normally you get groupage, so you've got so many meters on a lorry, and that lorry could be doing multiple drops throughout the UK. So there is questions on it, and certainly if there's things, I don't know, longhorn beetle was found in there or something like that, the entire lorry load is going to be quarantined no matter whether it's made of multiple consignments or not. So I think the long and short of it is going to be a bit of a mess in terms of Animal and Plant Health Authority things that are going to be on the load. So in a lot of cases, I've been in touch with my APHA representative, my plant health inspector, and done a lot of work with him on it just to make sure we're kind of getting these things right. But it's just these nuts and bolts parts of who does what in terms of duty deferments, VAT, whether you need a customs agent or not, and that nobody seems to be able to give you really a clear answer, or at the very least costs on it, which ultimately is what it's going to come down to.
No, you're right, and I mean HMRC would quote an average cost of a declaration being just over £30, but that depends on companies having lots and lots of business and companies having hardly any. So yeah, you're absolutely correct, and groupage is an issue because it only needs one to fail, so to speak, and it affects the whole whole movement. So you're absolutely correct in that regard. So again, it's easy for me to say working with your freight forwarder to make sure they're dealing with quality customers, but which is why some respects that freight forwarders are a bit nervous about who they're working with at the moment, who they're dealing with, because they don't want that situation to arise. But yeah, it is a real risk, and if your EU supplier is saying, yeah, we're still going to supply on DDP terms, you need to make sure you check their UK VAT and UK ORI number and realise that understand they realise it. And it could be they're saying they need a legal entity in the UK, because some of the stories coming out of Italy and France are that you need a legal entity in France to do the reverse, which is not entirely true, but the stories say that is the case.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
But no, some really, really good points there. So, so I think if it's FCA in, let's say you are responsible for the haulage. If it's FCA, so FCA Rotterdam, Amsterdam, etc., then effectively the responsibility for the declaration in Europe is the responsibility of the EU supplier, not yourself. So that's the difference between Ex-Works and FCA. Ex-Works, you are responsible for the loading of the goods. FCA, you are not responsible for loading. And technically that means if your supplier drops something in the loading process, it's your responsibility because you're purchasing under Ex-Works terms. As crazy as that may seem. And then, as you said, we have DDP and DAP delivered at place, and DAP can obviously be, doesn't have to be at your location, it can be inland or the port. And the difference, as we've said, in deliver duty paid and the responsibility, not just in terms of a declaration, but for import duty and import VAT. And again, it's important to say that if in terms of unpaid VAT, the EU authorities and the UK authorities are concerned there'll be a lot of unpaid VAT. So they do reserve the right to insist on legal entity status or some form of guarantees if there is unpaid VAT. Hopefully that won't be the case. So, and in terms of a declaration, even if it's your forwarder making it, you must have a full trail of commercial documents, commercial invoice, packing list, quotation, transport document, a full list of the whole journey, because upon audit, customs authorities require evidence that goods have left the country and goods have entered a customs territory. So customs declarations. So clearly depend on the Inco terms we've talked about, but what's in a customs declaration that suddenly becomes important? This is not just a declaration that the forwarder is making or an agent is making on your behalf. There is a requirement to select the correct commodity code, because as we said, commodity codes determine tariffs and determine licenses. So if you put the correct commodity code, incorrect commodity code, upon audit, if you've got the wrong one, customs can fine you for having the wrong one. And equally, if they see you've unpaid tax or paid less tax or duty, they could obviously fine you a bit more as well if they feel it was deliberately done. You also have to declare the correct valuation of the goods. So this is maybe a problem area, maybe not, but worth raising the question. So we have something called valuation of goods for customs purposes. So, and this, I'm sure it doesn't happen in the EU very much, he says, is a worldwide phenomenon, whereas some companies deliberately undervalue goods to pay less duties and less VAT. Clearly, there is a customs value declared, and customs check that value to have a checker to see if the value has been incorrectly done. It's more of an issue for a transfer price in an intercompany trade where there is this movement of figures. But be careful of the valuation of your goods. As long as it's within a certain parameter, it should be fine. There's a declarant of record, the VAT we've talked about, we'll talk about more. You need to maintain proof of import, but it also defers responsibility for licenses. And obviously the requirement for safety and security declarations by the haulier. So it's not just about putting in the customs declaration, it's the commodity code, correct valuation of goods as well. So a commercial invoice, I'm sure has the case, has to have correct information. So the Inco terms, commodity code need to be quoted on the commercial invoice. Normally, if an agent is making a declaration on your behalf, a customs declaration, they'll ask to see the commercial invoice with full information on it. So I'm now going to come, and I'm not 100% sure it's applicable for your circumstances, but let's talk about this as to whether it's relevant, and then we'll have some more questions. Now, in certain industries, use of customs procedures is a solution for eliminating import tariffs and import VAT. So we have certain types of customs procedures, special procedures. Customs warehousing, where you bring in goods, hold them in a warehouse, and you do not pay duty until the goods leave the warehouse. So let's say you're bringing goods to Wales, England, and you're holding them in a warehouse, and you're holding them for a period of time. Obviously, a longer period of time makes it more applicable. You do not pay import duty and import VAT until they've left the warehouse, but a warehouse has to be approved by customs. Then you have inward processing, where you're bringing goods in and you're carrying out a process to them. So for raw materials, component parts, and making intermediate goods, making finished goods. So if you hold them in an approved inward processing, you can then effectively, you don't pay duty until the goods leave the inward process and move into free circulation into the local economy. If you subsequently re-export, so I guess the Republic of Ireland is the main one example used, you would not pay import duty and import VAT. So we think of things bringing goods in from the European Union, from China, from Thailand, from Africa. Then these are examples of when inward processing could be used upon what will be a subsequent re-export to the European Union. Now, we tend to think about this more for excise goods, for beverages, for manufacturing goods, for retail, for clothing stores and things like that. I'm not sure if it applies to your sector or industry at all, but you would need to have goods that you are not selling for a certain period of time, but it's more the re-export side of things. So I don't know if that applies for anyone here, that sort of process, or is there more just a quick turnaround to your goods?
I was just going to ask, it occurred to me when I read the customs warehousing, if you considered your nursery a warehouse as such, and you bought things in, held onto them, and then exported back to the EU, would that be a way of deferring the VAT?
Yeah, it would be a way of eliminating as well, not just the VAT, but import duty, if there is import duty, as no trade deal.
Right, and I guess the words free circulation mean that as long as they're kept within the warehouse, if you deem that to be the nursery, that would be all right, would it?
Yeah, what you'd have to do is you'd have to be specially customs approved.
Right.
They would want evidence of competence, written procedures, and they would want evidence that you're storing the goods, for those, if you like, in the nursery, so it's kept separate from your other goods with separate record keeping, as well as a separate padlock on the door, etc. So they want evidence that they are kept in separate storage, that in the normal times they'd visit you to check that. You would need to be approved by customs. Normally it takes up to 120 days average to get the approval. However, the main thing that takes a long time, again, is our good friend, the bank guarantee. From January 2021, you know what I'm going to say, bank guarantees, financial guarantees are only required for high-risk traders.
Right, okay, then that's great. It's not necessarily something that would be applicable to us. It was just a sort of a thought process when I saw it come on the screen. Thank you.
Yeah. Great. So I don't know if there's any other questions on that at all. Okay. So we're just still doing absolutely fine for time. VAT, so relatively straightforward. And we're looking at the import side now, not the export side. So the import side into Great Britain. So for your EU supplier, they would have to zero rate the goods for VAT, and they would have to keep full proof of export files. So even if the forwarder agent's doing it on their behalf, you could argue that's their problem. You then, you can apply, if they're selling on DDP terms, however, they are responsible for the VAT, not you. And that becomes their responsibility, their liability for the VAT, not yours. Any other Inco term, the VAT is your responsibility, and the UK announced in the budget postponed VAT accounting. And this postponed VAT accounting applies to goods from anywhere in the world, not just the European Union. So you don't have to apply for postponed VAT account. Don't have to use it if you don't want, but the principle is you can apply it and offset it on your VAT return. So that applies for any goods you bring in from anywhere in the world, not just the European Union. Postponed VAT accounting. It was announced in the budget. Doesn't mean it's going to apply forever and a day. The last time it was in was 1993, before the UK joined the European Community, and it did apply for a good few years before then. So that's postponed VAT accounting on the VAT side. Now, I'm going to speak about Northern Ireland in a minute, but before I do, is anyone here, and again, if you're able to say, bringing goods from the rest of the world that come from Rotterdam, or are your suppliers all EU suppliers, and you're not, if you like, we'll talk about transshipment, moving it from rest of the world through Rotterdam or Antwerp to GB? No? Okay, so it's just EU. Okay.
Can I ask one quick question on the, sorry, just going back to that slide. You put in the UK importer record box on the right-hand side,
Yeah.
note if selling on DDP terms, then the EU exporter will require a UK ERORI number or UK VAT number. Is that themselves, or they will need your details? Is that what you're saying?
It should be them.
Right. Just how can, unless they've got an office in the UK, how can they have a UK ERORI number or VAT number?
They can. Technically they don't need an office. They can just apply for a UK VAT number and a UK EORI number.
Right. So that's perhaps what my supplier was getting at, perhaps.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Right.
And clearly due diligence will be undertaken by the UK authorities on your supplier, such as a credit reference check.
Yeah.
But assuming that's in order, the UK authorities should be able to provide that.
So what you're saying then in theory is if they have that in place, they can do a customs, that's a VAT rather, deferment on my behalf?
Absolutely. You do not become involved in the VAT. It's their responsibility.
No, it's fine. I mean, because as I say, hopefully if we get a deal, it'll be zero rated anyway. So they're thinking that they can do that on our behalf. Because a lot of what we've looked at here, I don't know what everybody else brings in, we're just a horticultural nursery moving live plant and tree material. The vast majority of it, other than bulbs and bits and pieces, is going to be zero rated under the commodity codes that are currently out. So if you can get things on DDP and get your exporter to do that for you, because that would save you a lot of work otherwise.
Lovely, thank you.
Okay.
Thanks. So Northern Ireland. Now, again, we've got the export one next week, and we don't think of Northern Ireland as an export. So I'll cover a bit of this, and I'll probably cover it because I'm not sure whether you're on next week's one or not. There will be additional requirements as a result of the Northern Ireland Protocol. And I know some of you, thank you for filling out the survey, Trade with Northern Ireland, and some of you don't. So under the Northern Ireland Protocol, the island of Ireland is known as is an SPS zone, a sanitary and phytosanitary zone of the European Union. So that means that goods entering Northern Ireland from Great Britain require to meet, in theory, the same checks and controls as they do for goods moving from GB to Southern Ireland, to France, to Germany, and other countries. So there will be required and need to be an import declaration for goods moving to Northern Ireland. You don't need an export declaration for goods leaving GB, but you do need an inbound declaration for goods entering Northern Ireland. And there also needs to be a entry safety and security declaration. Now, if goods are deemed to be at risk of going to Southern Ireland, you may have to pay tariffs, but if they stay in Northern Ireland, it should be rebated. Now, the process for at-risk goods at the moment is still being discussed. So it's unclear at the moment as to what will be an at-risk good. But it might not be the goods, it might be more the nature of the movement. The Joint Committee are due to announce hopefully next week, Joint Committee of the EU, UK and Northern Ireland politicians, what the process is around at risk. So now in theory, if you're selling, let's say, to a nursery for argument's sake in Northern Ireland, you'll say that nursery is in Northern Ireland. And if consumers from Southern Ireland go to that nursery in Northern Ireland, that's not your problem, that's a consumer choice. That's not at risk. The risk is the nursery in Northern Ireland moving it to a nursery in Southern Ireland straight away. That is the definition of at risk. But we're still waiting to hear the Joint Committee. So you have the inbound customs declaration, you have the inbound safety and security made by the haulier, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But then you have the SPS element of it as well. Which becomes a potential issue. Now, trade between the Northern Ireland and the Republic, Southern Ireland, the rest of the EU is no tariffs, no customs declarations. I'm very conscious here that some of you may use Holyhead route. So if you use Holyhead to Dublin and it goes to Northern Ireland, you can move the goods under what's called a transit procedure, but your freight forwarder would do that on your behalf. But it would be subject to SBS checks in Dublin. That is still required, even if it moves under a transit for customs purposes. A transit procedure is where you don't need, you can open the transit, your freight forwarder can open it at their office departure in Wales, for example, and close it in Belfast, for example. So that's Northern Ireland. There is what's called a trader support service, which some of you may have heard of, which allows you to register, and it takes you through a process where the declarations are made on your behalf, free of charge, certainly for the first 2 years. You're in reality, and we got a lot more slides, the Institute is involved in the consortium delivering this solution. In reality, it will be your haulier providing the information, and we would take the supplementary information from yourself. But if you register, that I can talk about this all day, but that's more the procedure. I'll talk more about Northern Ireland to Great Britain in a minute. But are there any questions you have on that? I know we'll also talk about that next week, about movements to Northern Ireland from Great Britain.
Yeah, sorry, I've got another one. If we were to send plants retail sales via box to Northern Ireland and it was to go through Royal Mail, how do we determine what route that box is likely to take? Or would it be deemed to have gone straight to Northern Ireland, not in transit? Or how would you see that working, please?
Yeah, so if you use Royal Mail, you engage with Royal Mail as you do today, and Royal Mail then would apply it in terms of their let's say their end-to-end journey, and they would just move the goods as they do today, but it's you would need an inbound declaration against that movement, so Royal Mail would probably liaise with the Trader Support Service on your behalf. Or Royal Mail could choose to do it themselves. So Trader Support Service is optional. Some very big fast parcel operators and the likes of the Royal Mail may choose to do it all themselves. The best thing to do is check with the Royal Mail.
Right, okay, thanks.
Do you know if Royal Mail move it by do they move it by sea at the moment, road and sea?
Well, actually, it's Parcel Force and Royal Mail, but I don't know, to be honest, and I'm reluctant to even go down that until there's a bit further clarification. As far as we're concerned, I consider it a hindrance to the export and not worth our while at this stage, but we'll see.
Yeah, and a lot depends on the Inco terms you're providing there again. So back to the same Inco terms. If you're arranging it, it's more likely that you're responsible, obviously with the Royal Mail Parcel Force on your behalf, for moving those goods.
Right. Okay, thanks.
I don't know if anyone else has got any questions there on that. Okay. So details of the trader support service, what I would suggest for now that you do register on it. Sorry, just coming back to EORI numbers again. Sorry to complicate things here. You will require, for moving goods to Northern Ireland, another EORI number, which will be an XI EORI number. If you have a GB EORI number, the likelihood is you will be auto allocated an XI EORI number about the middle of December. If you do not have an EORI number, you will not be allocated. And an XI EORI number is needed. The Royal Mail, for example, Parcel Force will ask for one from you. So you need to make sure you have an XI EORI if you're responsible for moving goods from Great Britain to Northern Ireland. But I do appreciate. So what about goods moving from Northern Ireland to Great Britain? Do you bring any products from NI to GB? Currently, the Northern Ireland Protocol says declarations are required in a limited number of circumstances. And guess what? Discussion is ongoing with the EU as to what a limited number of circumstances are, including high-risk plants. So we're waiting to see there if that is required. So there's ongoing discussion as to whether declarations are required. That would be an export declaration from Northern Ireland, not an import declaration into Great Britain. So that again is subject to discussions between the UK and the EU. So I don't know if that applies for anyone. If it does, I'm not sure if it does for bringing any products in from Northern Ireland to Great Britain. Okay. Now, further considerations. Now, normally we focused a lot on customs, on elements of product regulatory and tariffs, but just worth mentioning other considerations. And clearly, although this import-export labelling is important, I guess the example here is more food labelling. It's fair to say that the UK is being a lot more, how can I put it, sympathetic in terms of phasing labelling requirements. The EU is being less so currently. It is possible as part of a trade deal that the second part of the trade deal could have things like food business operator, that there's some form of mutual recognition, but you cannot rely on that. There could be a requirement for changes to labelling. Origin. This may not be applicable. I did want to mention this. Might not be, but so let's say there is a trade deal between the UK and the EU. There has to be a certain level of origin in the goods to evidence EU origin. So if that plant has originated outside of the European Union, is held in a EU supplier in Italy, in Netherlands, and comes on to you, if it does not meet those rules of origin of EU nationality, the goods will not be applied under the free trade deal between the UK and the EU. Now, those origin requirements work both ways. They could be 40, 50 or 60% EU origin. So I don't know if that's an issue, but if any of your suppliers in the EU are getting plants from outside the EU, that could be an issue for them.
Sorry, I don't quite follow what you're saying there. Are you saying if they've brought something in from a third country, rebadged it and then forwarded it on, it's then not an EU product and it's got customs and everything else implications?
Tariff implications, that's right. Yeah. Yeah. I guess the argument is if they've rebadged it or repackaged it, sold it under a great brand name where it's got intellectual property protection, they could argue possibly that it meets the EU origin requirements because they've added sufficient value to it.
Yeah, it's whether there's consideration within the EU of how long. It's like when people say British grown and they've grown it in the UK for 6 weeks, but it was originally a Dutch liner. When does it become a British grown plant? When you've grown it into a 2 litre from a 9 centimetre, or from a plug, or there is this grey area, and that sounds like another grey area to me.
It does. Now, the ultimate decision as to whether it's EU origin sits in the organisation, so a Chamber of Commerce, for example, or the customs authorities of the country concerned as to whether it's EU origin. So clearly it's in their domain to determine whether it's EU origin or not.
Okay, because you're not always to know. If you're buying something from the Italians, for example, or the Dutch, it might have come from a third country. You don't always know that. I would say unlikely in most areas, but the plant lists get ever longer for the Chelseas and everything else that we do each year, and there is risk of that. But we'll let the politicians thrash that one out. But thank you.
Yeah. I mean, as you say, if you're in any doubts, I guess, well, it's a difficult one, definitely. If there is a trade deal, there will be rules of origin at each commodity code line. We're hearing at the moment the UK wants it at 40%. The EU wants it at 60%.
What's the percentage of your? Is that
Yeah, so that's the percentage of the sales price, commercial invoice price. So if they've added branding on, repackaging, relabeled, grown a bit, it may meet the requirements. But if not, then obviously the local Chamber of Commerce or Customs authorities won't issue that certificate of origin.
But you're saying this percentage, is that you're saying 40%? 40% of what? You mean 40% of 8% tariff, or
Sorry, that would be 40%. To meet the rules of origin, 40% of the commercial invoice value. So let's say something's being sold for £10,000.
Yeah.
40, so if the origin requirement is 40%, £4,000 of that would have to be EU origin. If it's 60%, it would need to be £6,000 of it.
Per consignment, are we talking about here, or
per export?
Yeah. So they're normally talking consignment terms on or lorry or meterage. Okay, that's a consideration. But you would hope then that on most deliveries that you're getting, because you've got a mix of stuff on there, a small percentage might be third country, etc. So it wouldn't meet that requirement anyway, so you should get around the rules.
You would hope so, yes.
Yeah, that's okay. Fair enough. That's
when I say that. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
I thought that you had to you had to change the commodity code quite significantly to be able to for the rules of origin. Well, am I right? Was it the commodity code?
No, you're right, Hazel. You're right.
Yes.
So normally you have something within commodity codes called last substantial transformation. And that means that the digits 5 and 6 as subheadings have to be made, but that's for last substantial transformation.
Okay.
A Chamber of Commerce can still agree, and we're talking obviously in an EU sense here, not a UK sense, can still agree if there's sufficient value add through branding, repackaging, but it's all down to the Chamber of Commerce to agree that, and it's their decision.
Well, at point of, sorry, I don't want to get too technical, but at point of, you send, in the chain of things, you send a purchase order off to your supplier with a list of plants, etc. They send you a PC, a phytosanitary certificate, and you would hope a CSV upload file that you can put into Peach system or iPass system, as it will be called, mid-February, hopefully. At that point, each item is delegated within its banding, its commodity code. You're saying that they will reissue would correct put in the right commodity code banding for the CSV upload. Is that what you're saying? Yeah.
So if you excuse me, it's more of them when they're sending the goods to you. If there is a trade agreement, they will have to have a certificate of origin to evidence those goods are of EU origin, which would be issued by the Chamber of Commerce. It could be a more electronic system. There is an electronic system at the moment which could be used as part of it, which is more self-certification, but that needs to be approved by customs authorities. So if it's last substantial transformation, you can change, that results in a change in the commodity code at digits 5 and 6. But as I say, then obviously comes into debates around branding and value add. So I guess if you're, I don't know, if you're, I know it's the wrong example, if you're Gucci or something like that, you could say you've got huge value in your brand, etc.
I'd love to say I was Gucci, but there we are.
As I
We're
say,
trying to do that in the plant world, but there we are. I'll leave you with it. Thank you.
Yeah. So post and parcels is what we've said. Is around there, the rights to the Royal Mail or fast parcel operators, DHL, UPS, FedEx, and others. And then we have trade agreements with third countries. So this is worth pointing out. I'm not sure if it's hugely relevant for you, but if you're importing goods from outside the European Union. So currently, the UK is part of the EU trade agreements up to the end of a transition period. At the end of a transition period, the UK is no longer allowed to participate in trade agreements that the EU have. So the UK has been negotiating trade agreements with third countries, around 74 of them. And on this slide, you have the web link here. You have the trade agreements to be agreed. Canada was obviously announced at the weekend to add to that list. So we can see there are some trade deals that have been signed, the likes of Switzerland, Norway, for example, Morocco. But if we look at trade agreements not signed, so Japan has been signed and it isn't called a continuity agreement. Canada has said just recently agreed. We can see some countries like Turkey, where a trade deal has not been signed. Turkey will not be signed until such time as the EU is signed. Turkey will follow. Ghana, we can see in Egypt, we can see several countries there, Mexico, Singapore, etc. So what that means is currently, when if you're buying from these countries, goods are entering the UK under a free trade deal that the EU has, and it could be zero tariff, reduced rates of tariff from the 1st of January. Unless trade deals are signed with these countries, you will have to pay tariffs on importing goods based on the current UK global import tariff, if there is a tariff. So I don't know if it affects any of you in terms of those countries. Okay. Wooden pallets, ISPM 15, I think we've covered already, but I did want to put a separate slide on it. I just want to mention it's obviously not the main focus today, but I'll quickly say GDPR is potentially a big issue. So there's a number of issues which have not been agreed yet between the UK and the EU. They may or may not be agreed in time, but the focus is on the free trade agreement currently. And it applies for the European Economic Area, not just the EU as well. So technically, and I'll just quickly sort of summarize the following 3 slides, is that the EU and UK are trying to agree a mutual recognition deal which allows mutual recognition of holding data. But if you hold data on anyone with an EU address, a consumer, you could in theory be in breach of data protection rules from the 1st of January. So that could be a customer, it could be an employee, it could be a business contact who you booked a hotel for example, in the UK or GB in the past. You could have standard contractual clauses, but what you have to do is check those standard contractual clauses are in accordance with the wording approved by the European Commission. And in this slide, you've got a web link there, the Information Commissionaire's Office, the ICO, which is a government organisation, provides examples of the process you have to go through for holding that data. Probably slightly more relevant if we think it from an import side, if you're holding data for any of your employees, you do need to check standard contractual clauses. So do look at this web link there. I'll just quickly mention, if any of you hold intellectual property or branding or trademarks, from the 1st of January, your EU trademark will also be cloned into a new UK trademark. What that means, though, is every single EU trademark will be cloned into a new UK trademark. So suddenly, German companies, Polish companies, etc., will have a new UK trademark, not just yourself. That cloning process, I say, is due to take place from the 1st of January. So in terms of what to do, look at tariffs, agree Inco terms, communicate with customers and suppliers. There is talk of in the EU, there is a low value, a bulk import for goods under £135. So the UK's got to announce more on that. That may not apply for yourselves. And just prepare for the future. So conscious of time now, having said there's plenty of time, and happy to take further questions. Thanks.
I've got a question. We import coir bags for strawberry growing. What are our responsibilities to achieve this?
Yeah, so what you have to check is that it sounds quite, you would need to agree to terms of trade, the Inco terms with your supplier. So currently, who is responsible for the freight and the haulage on that? Oh, sorry, you're on mute. Sorry.
Sorry, the supplier.
Okay. So if the supplier is responsible, and if you like, the bags proverbially turn up at your premises, it could be DDP or DAP, delivered duty paid or delivered at place. If it's delivered at place, you have to take responsibility for the inbound customs declaration and everything that follows. And you would be responsible for tariffs if there are any import tariffs. If it's DDP, your supplier has to take responsibility for the declaration. So everything we've said. So probably the most important thing there becomes agreeing the Inco terms. It could be DDP, delivered duty paid, or delivered at place, DAP. So you need to negotiate with them. If it's DDP, they are responsible for obtaining a UK VAT number and a UK EORI number and a declaration. So there's a lot more work for them. They could accept to do that. You could say, well, you're going to have to do it. But there are things to consider there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great. Any other questions from anyone at all?
Yeah, I've got three really. We did have an EORI number, but I applied for it last November. But apparently, it was if we had last November, it was to do with if we had a no deal or a deal, and so I've had to reapply for another EORI number. Do you know how long it usually takes for them to come through?
It shouldn't be long. Sometimes it's instantaneous. Sometimes if they need to do background checks, it can take a week. Could I just check, in preparation for potential no deal last September, October, all VAT registered businesses were automatically allocated an EORI number, or those that hadn't had one already.
Oh, sorry, not EORI number. What am I talking about? I've got my EORI number, my deferment account. It was the yeah, it's the same thing, but deferment account. I applied for the deferment account last November, but when I was giving out the deferment account number to somebody, it was incorrect. So I got back in touch with customs, and they said that they have to issue me with another one. So you know, do you know how long it usually takes for them to issue you with a deferment account number?
I guess it shouldn't take too long. They're going to need to do checks. Normally, customs would require a financial guarantee, a bank guarantee, to support the deferment account. From 1st of January, they've indicated that's not needed unless the business is a high-risk trader for the reasons I've indicated. So the removal of the requirement for a bank guarantee should lessen the time there. I guess it's subject to background check, so it probably should just be a matter of weeks.
Okay.
Have they mentioned to you anything about a financial requirement for a financial guarantee?
No, they just emailed to say that they'd received the application, and that was it really. That's all I've received from them.
So if they do come back to you and say they require a financial guarantee, it could be that they know from the 1st of January one isn't required for a high-risk traders. What they'll do is they'll do a credit search on you and everything like that, and check your records to make sure you paid all your taxes on time. But if they come back to you and say they do require a financial guarantee, from the 1st of January one is not needed except for high-risk traders. But it could be what they're doing is they're just sort of waiting in that regard for the 1st of January. But do check with them.
Okay, so 2 out of 3 is point of delivery the same as place of destination? Because we've applied for a point of delivery.
So there's two elements there. If you think of it in Inco terms, it's the name place, or think first of all in Inco terms, it's the name place on the Inco term. So let's say, for argument's sake, your business is based in Newport, just for argument's sake. If the Inco term says DAP Newport, that is the point of delivery for Inco terms and for the logistics.
No, it's not me. My husband has applied for something. He emailed me before, and he asked if I could ask about it. He's applied or sent off for something called point of delivery, but I think he's muddled up, and I think
if it's place of destination, it's the name place of destination that you name. So there's two elements. There's the place of destination, if you like, for regulatory and compliance purposes, and there's the point of delivery for Inco terms.
Okay.
Which is, and they can be one and the same, clearly, but they could be different.
All right then. And my third question, but this is 3 out of 3, the Peach and website. Or we've had a look at it, and it is really well. It's not that complicated, but what it is there's lots of drop-down boxes, and so say for instance you're putting boxes in there. There's drop-down boxes, and there could be thousands. It could take you hours and hours to input all the plants from an import side of things. Just wondered if you've got any information on that, if it's going to
I'd love to say, it's a great question. I'd love to say yes to that. I don't know if you've had contact with APFA or anyone else on the call has any guidance on that one. Probably I'm not necessarily the best person to answer that one, but I would have thought, and I know APFA are very busy, but John, I don't know if you've got anything to add there.
Yeah, sorry, I stuck myself on mute. Essentially, you can't sit like you do on eDomero at the minute for reportable issues, for oaks and things, individually putting them in. You basically ask for a CSV upload from the supplier. So you send them your PO, get one back from them. We'll need to know, obviously, the right column, so it'll upload directly into Peach system. And then it'll flag up any that don't marry up in terms of, species or cultivar. And then you can just literally go in and amend manually the issues rather than putting in the whole bulk list.
Okay, thank you, John.
It's not that difficult, but it's just time consuming more than anything. Like anything, all this is just going to add time and cost, unfortunately, to what we're doing. But ask for a CSV upload file. So it'll take it and essentially upload it like an Excel format so it can be edited. Yeah.
Okay, right. And then it'll just highlight anything that's.
It sort of pairs up and marries up with the the species and cultivars that are in the system. Yeah. The worst ones are if you've got like Italian type plants or something where they've got a different a funny sort of name for some of the plants, for example. Mm-hmm. So you then have to kind of manually go in and go, is it pyramidalis or something like that, rather than stricter or something on the end of a name, and then and work it that way. But it's fiddly, but it's not too bad. But don't sit and try and do them manually. Be there forever. The volume of stuff we have, you never be able to do it.
Yeah. Okie dokie. Thank you.
All right.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very, very much, and I'll pass you back to Donna. Thank you.
Oh, thanks ever so much, Kevin, for a very informative session. A lot of information to sort of take in there, and so thanks ever so much indeed. And thank you all for attending and for asking some very interesting questions, which have participated to a very informative session today. As you can see in the chat box, I have put a link to a survey, which we'd be very grateful if you could complete. It does help us for future training. And we do have the export training now. That's coming up on the 1st of December at 2 o'clock. The link is on our website, but if you've got any problems, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us. And for anything else Tyfu Cymru can help with, you've got our contact details. Please don't hesitate to get in touch with us, and thank you all very much for attending today. And thanks again, Kevin.